Hello, everybody, and happy Halloween. Welcome to the Tatiana Show. I'm very happy to have a really exciting show for you today for many reasons. One of the reasons is Josh is with us today, and me and Josh haven't been on a Tatiana show together, despite our co-host status, in a very long time. So nice to see you, Josh.
Oh, nice to see you too, Tatiana. It's wonderful to be back.
Oh, well, I'm happy to see you. We've got a lot of really cool stuff coming on. We've got Agnieszka Pilat, who's a Polish artist, also libertarian, and she's going to be talking to us about art and her journey. And then we've got Scott Horton, the author of Fool's Errand and radio show host at Antiwar.com. He's an editor, so he's done a lot of really cool stuff. We're going to start it with like up and art, and then I have a feeling it might be a little bit more depressing toward the end of the episode, but I think it's going to be really neat. I just saw Scott at the Freedom Fest conference. I'm not Freedom Fest. That's where I met Agnieszka. I saw Scott at the Contra Krugman cruise, and he gave these talks, and he talked about Yemen, and I didn't even know where Yemen was, and now I know, and it's even more depressing than before. But important stuff. But, you know, if we're going to talk about that stuff, we also have to talk about the positives. So that's where we're going to start with Agnieszka, who's going to tell us a little bit about art and how it's making an impact. Agnieszka, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Tatiana. Very excited to be here.
Me too. So you and I, we first met at Freedom Fest. We did a panel together, and I was super excited because whenever I meet Polish people, I don't know, what does that make me, like a pro-Polak person? But I am. I'm always excited to get a chance to speak in Polish and connect with people. I also consider Poland to be this hotbed of freedom. There's sort of that, I don't know, whenever I go to Poland, they have a really freedom-oriented spirit. So thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, where are you broadcasting from right now?
Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi, I'm in San Francisco, so this is where I live and work, and that's where my studio has been for the last, almost 10 years now, I think.
So tell us a little bit about, and for people who aren't familiar with your work, bring us back a little bit and how did you start out, and what has your evolution looked like career-wise?
Yes, I'm gonna link a little bit into what you said, that you like Polish people because we have the spirit of freedom and all that, and that fit into my art very much. So what happened, in Poland, especially my generation, we've been very fortunate to see before communism and after communism, and it had a huge impact, again, especially my generation. In the older generation, I think some people, it's been a rough transition for some people, so you can see both sides, but again, like millennials and such, very optimistic. So what happened was, so I was living in Poland and I came here, and then a friend gave me a book, and that book just had such an impact on me that I thought I couldn't just sit on the sidelines and do nothing. And the book was Atlas Shrugged. It has a huge impact on me. And I read that book and I thought, I wish more people knew about it, especially my generation or younger people. So I thought it's a perfect material to make it into a graphic novel. So I enrolled to study illustration, and my goal was just that, making that book into a graphic novel. And so what happened was, I wanted to make sure this was like the best graphic novel in the world, and I wanted to become a very strong artist. So that took me towards fine art, and I just never went back. So that's why I dropped, my life took a different direction. And even though my work is still very connected to my ideas, and I'll tell you why, that particular thing got shelved, although I know there's people working on it.
Very cool. I like that. So what medium did you end up with? Where did you end up once you decided to sort of go into fine art? And also, who decides what makes art fine, right? If you could tell me a little bit about that, because I'm not a visual artist, and I'm always interested as to who's the arbiter of that and what qualifies good art.
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So that's why I mentioned to you earlier that I want to talk about Instagram a little bit and social media. So not much, very much like in politics, what's happening a lot. Social media really, and especially Instagram, ripped into the art establishment. And it's actually a very exciting thing. So what's happening, in the past year, what defines fine art? Well, it's curators, it's art critics, much less actually commercial galleries. It's mostly curators. And we all know that curators, as a general group, I'd say they come out from art education system, the government art education system very often, and they have very strong leanings, and sometimes I think they come out very corrupt, not by their own fault, but I think it's the system that's very corrupt. So what we see in the fine art is that there's no value in skill. In fact, there's been a movement of what's called de-skilling in art for the last 50 years probably. And skill has nothing to do with what's defined as art. And generally is the curators, quote, the elites. I don't really like that word too much, but they decide what art is. And that's what's so exciting about Instagram. What happened in the last 10 years is that Instagram is a very honest medium. And I know there's a lot of, backlash against social media, this or that. In my profession, I think, again, Instagram and Facebook are very, very honest media, because, people who follow me on Instagram, they don't follow me for my name. It's valued. It is what it is when they see it. And it's interesting that a lot of very well-known artists, or artists of the quote establishment, they can't build a following on Instagram because honestly, visually, their work is not interesting at all. And again, their prestige comes from connection, from art consultants, from dealers, all that. And again, Instagram is such an honest medium. It is what it is. It's kind of like drawing in art. That's one of my favorite, even though I don't draw much no more, but drawing is a very honest medium. Either you can draw or you can't. You can't fuzz it, especially figure. So I just want to give a shout out to Instagram. It's just a really great medium, and it helped my career tremendously.
I think we saw it.
Fascinating. No, I think that was really interesting because in my very, very limited art conversations, I had one with someone who is an art dealer or whatever, and he said that, number one, art can be a very dirty business for laundering money, but also that all of the art that's basically come out in the past 50 years approximately, that was his window, is basically trash. And there's basically like this oncoming thing where all of that artwork from that period of time, there's going to be like a really big price correction. So I thought that was really wild, and it certainly seems like a space ripe for disruption. My only concern with Instagram is that Instagram and all of these larger platforms, they sort of like game it in favor of one person or another, or if they don't do it now, they're kind of going in that direction. We see that with a lot of censorship in YouTube. Do you feel that art can be like, there's a purpose to having art censored, and under what circumstances would that even occur?
Yeah, interesting. You pointed out about censorship and such. So what happened to Instagram when they got bought by Facebook? It became a totally different game, and it's happening what you're saying. It's being, quote, curated, and favors people who already are quite popular. It's very hard. Like if I started to build Instagram now, I would have a very, very hard time. So yes, I agree. And I think Facebook has been kind of like a bad player in Instagram. A lot of our Instagram community were kind of upset. I'm sorry, and your original question was?
Sorry, I have a mute button so we don't get any background noise. I guess I'm just wondering, if there is a way for that to be censored, and under what basis, with for example, with blatantly political speech, you know, or a YouTube video or something, like that's something where you can say, okay, I don't like what this person is saying. I wonder if that has the same, like, is there something visually that can be also seen as subversive? Like, how is one subversive with art today, and can that be censored?
Right. Yeah, that exists, of course. But there's different levels of being, you know, you can direct your career as an artist in different directions. You can be work towards being commercially successful, and that's kind of what's been my route. Just you know, getting into galleries and selling work and such, having collectors. Another totally different route is just following grants, and a lot of artists live in that space, and they create work that is not commercially viable at all. From my experience, generally, and again, it's my personal opinion, I don't think that work is very good, because it caters into what's popular and very status quo. I actually think, like, you know, female rights and, you know, social, what's that?
Justice?
Yeah, social, excuse me, thank you. Social, I can't even pronounce it. I can't even, social justice and sexism or environment. So actually, artists who follow the route of grants, they're just answering to what's already being said. They are really not originals at any, like, not at all. So I don't have much respect, I would say, for that. And the third venue would be, you know, just social media, trying to create so much buzz that people start approaching you. And that's kind of happening to me now too. And that's the most honest way to do it, because your name is becoming bigger by the value of your work. All you see is the work. There is no connections. You know, people on Instagram, they don't care if I had a museum show or not. And again, just really very honest medium. And censorship in that sense, well, Facebook, Instagram censored. Like, if you have a nude figure, you have to cover the nipples. It's kind of like, if you paint a nude figure, you cover the nipples. It's actually quite funny. In terms of subversive, not on Instagram, hasn't happened to me. No, but no, it's such a bigger conversation in my work, because my work, it's a positive and is a shout out about industry and paying tribute to industry. It's not politically charged. It's more a moral statement what I'm doing. So far I have not been censored about that.
How do you monetize if you're on, like, what is the artist funding looking like right now, right? What does it look like if you're an artist? What are your different ways that you can survive and not be a waitress? And how has that evolved?
Yeah, it's extremely hard business, extremely hard. So first of all, Instagram, I've never done it, and I still don't do it for any financial reasons. I sold some stuff on Instagram, but it's really not my purpose, and it's not very big. So people who go on Instagram and they think all of a sudden they're going to be selling artworks left and right, I think it's a myth or a dream, maybe in a different price range, but in my price range, it's not a market for me. The market is reaching, you know, curators and museums and corporate, so they see my work. And so in terms of support, well, for me personally, is just selling my work through galleries and some private collectors and a dealer. So that's how I support myself. It's very hard to get to this place when you first graduate from school. There is, I mean, unless you were extremely lucky and someone picks up your work and you get, quote, discovered, I don't even know what it means. I think it's a myth. So I think it's very typical, actually, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, to be having a full-time job, other job. And the best way to do it, and how many artists do it, is by teaching. So I know I bitched about system a little bit, universities, but in terms of supporting art, when people don't realize, is the universities that support art by giving people jobs. So yeah, there's a lot of professors who are, you know, quite successful in their own right as artists. They will still be professors because it takes off that edge that you have to make a living of your art, and I think it's extremely helpful, actually.
I think one of the biggest confusions I've always seen with artists is whether, you know, Tatiana touched on it before with fine art, but with design. And a lot of artists that I know are also designers. And I've always wondered what the difference is. And I think generally the feedback is a designer is more of a prostitute, where they'll have a boss that's paying them for something, and they'll be the end say how that's portrayed. And whereas an artist can just splatter paint all over whatever they want to do, however they express themselves, and see if there's a buyer for that product. Is that good portrayal of?
Yes, I agree. And I think it's actually, there's nothing wrong with it again. And I think especially like if you are in the field that's close to you, like design, I think you learn a lot about art, and also the business part of it. I mean, the business part, people think that like, oh, as an artist, you just sit in your studio when you, quote, express yourself. It's not even close to being true. I spend more time hustling and doing business stuff that I paint. Like, no doubt, if I paint 40% of the time of my, quote, work time, which is from dusk till dawn, I'm then happy. A lot of business takes time. And so yeah, it's that's the way it is. And you know, a lot of like, when I paint, I read a lot. I listen to a lot of audiobooks and a lot about artists and writers who've been very successful. And a lot of people, they don't want that edge of I have to make a living and then, you know, turn into a factory. Like, I don't want to, you know, give any names, but there is artists like that who just, you know, the factories. And you can bring up even people like Warhol, who, you know, who was doing his own stuff, but for a long time he was painting portraits of his patrons, and that's how he had this you know, luxury of doing really what he thought was good. And he was a graphic designer. That's a whole other thing. I mean, Warhol was a graphic designer ultimately.
What sort of advice would you give to a young artist that's starting out in the field and seeing all these opportunities by getting in touch directly with their fan base through Instagram and stuff like that? What advice would you give them to get started?
Yeah, Instagram, again, like I said, it's been harder to grow, to be really honest, so people don't need to understand that. But I think building a community of people you know and starting kind of and supporting each other, because right now Instagram, you can grow only really if people mention you. So the more people you know who will mention you, the better you will grow. And then, you know, also Instagram, and again, like, it's hard to talk about money in this whole thing, but for me, what Instagram also did was just I became very productive, because I became obsessed with picking up new people and growing my community. So I had to think, okay, I have to produce content so I can post it. And it's one of those externalities, you know, which we know from the economy, from the market. But like in my case, the externality of using Instagram was that I became more productive, and I started creating other funky things that are still related very much to my work, but they just become taking off on themselves. Like I started doing videos of this doll, and people just really love it. So I guess my advice to Instagram, to young artists would be, don't go into art you think you will make money. You will be very unhappy. You can't go with that premise. You have to you have to have other income. It's extremely rare to be making money like in the first few years, especially. Maybe after 5 years hustling, you will start making money. But the first year, very, very hard. You just have to push forward, think there is no going back, do everything right to grow your career, but don't expect you're gonna be, making a lot of money.
Also, I think that people forget how annoying it is to be poor. Like, if you're poor for a while, and I've had a lot of long-term poverty as an artist, It really grates on you. The romance is gone. I'm sorry, but my father and my mother, but my father especially, was very anti me going to Berkeley, and I understand now at the music school in Boston. And now I understand a little bit better the perspective of you have to have a regular steady income. Because at the time I was like, oh, you are so, provincial. This is my romantic life. I thought this is going to be it. And what do they know? And man, it's really, really difficult. So I think sometimes with social media, there's this desire for fame without having the interest in the work and the process that goes into acquiring accolades. And it's a little bit skewed. I created an artist cryptocurrency, Tatiana coin, and we have some issues because the SEC is like, not that we talk to them, but there are some concerns so we don't end up going to jail for accidentally doing something wrong. But I love the idea of using the artist coin for artists themselves, because then they can have their own, like when Instagram says, I don't like Agnieszka anymore, they can shut down your account and you'll never talk to those people again. You don't own that relationship. So even if it isn't through my project, the evolution of cryptocurrency, I think, is a really great opportunity for artists to create long-term value for their fans. Have you flirted with cryptocurrencies at all yet? Has anyone bought your work for Bitcoin?
No, I have, but you know what? Because I live in Silicon Valley, I know people who are, like extremely wealthy from Bitcoin.
Yeah, those are the people you got to call up. You've got to make so I'll ask you a question. Sometimes people will say to me, Tatiana, you should do a song about this, or you should do a song about this. And I find it a little bit annoying because it's like, you write a song about that. That's not my inspiration. Or they'll make it for something like, oh, we'll write a song about Dash or write a song about Ethereum. It's like, yeah, they're fine, but I'm not just going to write Bitcoin songs all day long. Do you ever run into anything like that where people ask you to do something and it doesn't resonate with you? How does that work?
Oh, yeah, all the time. All the time. That said, what I learned, it took me a long time to take myself out of my work. I think that's the way of people to trying to connect to you.
Totally, I agree. I'm just
and each person think they're special. I think I'm special. You think you're special. Every person on the street, they think they're special. I think they think their idea is special, and it's annoying. But ultimately, it's just really their way of trying to connect to you. So I used to be annoyed. Now I'm much more kinder, and I understand what they mean by that. It's just a way of telling they love your work.
Yeah, I agree. I do worry about the artistic process a little bit, because it's like my work is very like subject oriented, sort of. I'm referencing different things that are happening currently, so to speak. But anyway, so can anybody come in? Like, how can people see your work? Where can people connect with you and maybe pay you in Bitcoin for it?
Instagram. Well, you can see my work on Instagram. It's Agnieszka _Pilat. I know.
How do you spell that? Let's spell that out.
All right. AGNIESZKA _PILAT. Agnieszka Pilat. That's my Polish name. And I just did a limited print release. So this is like the way to buy my work. That's still like I sometimes embellish them. So there's other ways to buy work if you don't want to spend, $10,000 on a painting. But you can do that too. You're very welcome. Just email me.
Very nice. I like your style. Okay, so Josh, do we have any more questions for Agnieszka, or should we bring on Scott? I think we should also thank our sponsors. But Agnieszka, I had such a great time with you. I hope that we get to spend some time in New York. I'll write you after this and we'll coordinate.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I love doing these interviews. I learned so much just talking during interviews. Thank you.
Oh, well, it was our pleasure. So please come back and see us soon, and we'll be sure to link to your work, and we'll share with you this so you can share it around, and I'll friend you on Instagram. I'm Tatiana Moroz Music, I think. And now I know you for sure.
That's good. Yeah.
But I already knew how to spell Agnieszka. All right.
Yeah, it's great work, guys. You definitely do yourself a favor and check it out.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Agnieszka. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
I know. So, guys, before we bring on Scott, I think that we should thank our sponsors, Josh. You always do such a nice job with it. I'm like, oh, this guy's cool, that guy's cool. Maybe you wanna do the reads. You'll be like Robin in Howard Stern.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, hello? We've lost Tatiana.
No, you haven't. I'm trying to play with the mute button, but anyway, it's fine. Go ahead. You take it away, bro.
No, look, we have some really good sponsors, and one of them is the Bitcoin CPA. And we all know, I can't stand taxes. Can you stand taxes, Tatiana? I don't think there's anyone that can stand taxes, especially in Bitcoin.
Taxation is theft.
Yeah, taxation.
I can't go without saying it.
But if you don't want to go to prison because there's some, bully standing behind you, forcing you to pay for stuff that you don't want to pay for, but you have to pay for it anyway. So get the Bitcoin CPA into it, because Bitcoin is very, very complex in terms of taxation sometimes. So make sure you're safe, and he does just a fantastic job with that. We have also Netkey. They one of those?
Yeah, we've got Netkey. They're I haven't spoken to Don in a while, but we should have them on the show. Our main sponsor would be like cryptocompare.com for sure.
Great.
They've got all the information about all the different cryptos. Don't they have something linked to you, Josh? Like
they link to Vaultoro. So you can compare all your cryptos in the value of gold, which is fantastic, because, hey, why did we get into crypto in the first place? It was to get away from fiat. And so now you can actually price crypto in gold. So you're pricing an asset against another asset, which is, I think, a really cool idea. A very, very a good way to look forward in the future. I mean, why price it against some made up bit of paper?
And if you guys want to get gold and Bitcoin, you can go to Vaultoro.com. Also, special thanks to freeross.org. I always like to bring attention to Lynn, thirdkey.solutions. Pamela's helping people get secure. That's always neat. Some of my favorite podcasts, Sovereign Tech, Sex and Science Hour. I know that MK Lords is making one soon, and she's been doing, I think it's called like Iconosas or something like that. But that's really fun. And I got a chance to hang out with her in Atlanta, so that was neat. Awesome. Really quick, Crypto Media Hub, my company, and libertycraze.com will help you get t-shirts made in the crypto, or like for like libertarian stuff. I mean, it could be a regular t-shirt, but he's a libertarian guy. So if you need to get shirts done, go to libertycraze.com, and Dana can help you out. But without further ado, we need to bring up our next guest, because this one's going to be pretty intense if it's anything like it was on the Contra Krugman cruise. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Scott Horton.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
All right, everyone went crazy, like really big crowd yelling and stuff.
I'll try to take it easy on you.
So I have known Scott for a while. He's very well known for his anti-war work. I just picked up his book that was recently released called Fool's Errand: Time to End the War in Afghanistan. And another line that should say like, and all the other ones. No, really, bro. So I have a signed copy. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I got a little earful in the conference room, and I learned a lot. So Scott, thanks very much. I'm really looking forward to you joining us and telling us a little bit, but maybe you could give our audience a little bit of background. Like, how did you get started? What do I mean, you're the author of Fool's Errand. You're the director of Libertarian Institute. You've done 4,500 interviews. You're also on kpfk.org, and you're the editor at Antiwar. I mean, that's like crazy. But you have, this everyman thing going too, which I think is really neat. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your story.
Oh, I'm really not that interesting. I'm just a typical anti-government extremist.
Those are my favorite kinds.
Yeah, I'm a skater, so I've always hated cops since I was a little kid, and then they burned me, and then so I'm stuck like this ever since then.
Hey, I'm the same, man. I skated my whole life, and it was always cops. And you think, I'm just moving on a board with wheels. What's your problem?
Exactly. So, see, we believe in freedom because we're individuals at heart, and that's all skateboarders think. So.
Hey, well, don't tread on me.
So I'm glad you guys had a skater moment. I liked skaters. I thought that they were good looking, and I was glad for the trend, just so I can relate too. But so when me and Scott, we were walking in, I don't remember, maybe Haiti or something, I said to him, I said, listen, I really like your stuff, but I don't want to listen to it because I feel really overwhelmed. And when you start hearing about foreign policy from basically an expert, it's really overwhelming. You've got a million different words and a million different places and terms that you don't understand. But I think it's really important to become educated about that. So me and Scott had, he says to me, he says, well, you got to start somewhere. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing his wise sage advice, but it made me a little bit more open-minded. But how did you become such an expert?
Well, I mean, the same way I advise, really. I'm a talk radio fan who became a talk radio host. And so, I think one good example of what you're talking about writ small was when I started interviewing Gordon Prather, who is a former nuclear weapons physicist for the U.S. Army and worked at Sandia and Lawrence Livermore Laboratories making H-bombs during the Cold War. And then he started this later in life. His retired writing career was debunking lies about North Korea and Iran. And so when I started learning about that, it was really biting off more than I could chew. I got to learn all about the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Safeguards Agreement and the additional protocol to the Safeguards Agreement. And I got to learn all about uranium and plutonium and heavy and light water reactors. And I got to learn all about the inspections regime and the characters behind the International Atomic Energy Agency. And so what I did was I just interviewed him about 5 or 10 times. And in preparation for those interviews, I would just sit down and read 10 or 20 of these articles. And then at some point you understand what an additional protocol to a safeguards agreement is. It starts out pretty opaque, but it's just like anything else. Put a little bit of work into it and then it all becomes clear. And then in this case, of course, the truth is so different than the narrative that then you get to have a lot of fun with it. And I mean that fun in the not fun way of seeing the world carry on as though Iran is making nuclear bombs and threatening to attack America and Israel at any moment with them, when all along they've had a safeguards agreement with the IAEA under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and all their nuclear program has been civilian in nature. So in other words, it sounds complicated at first, but then at the end, it's really not that hard, right? They're part of the international inspection regime. They always have been.
So this is what I love about the time that we're living in now. We have shows like yours, like ours, like, this whole excuse that, the mainstream media controls everything. I think those days are over, and we don't have excuses anymore like that. And the more and more young people I talk to, the more and more people, really, I'm always surprised at how many people actually know so much more than I thought they would, compared to the older generations who are still watching the mainstream media, who are still just bombed with this propaganda about these countries. It constantly surprises me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Antiwar.com has been there for 20 years now. I mean, if you want to talk about the run up to Iraq War II in 2002 and 2003, you could read, if you were the kind of person who read Antiwar.com regularly,
yep,
you could debunk every single lie that they had told before the war had started about the aluminum tubes and the uranium from Africa and the ties to Osama and the mobile biological weapons laboratories and the unmanned aerial vehicles that can spray you with germ weapons, and every bit of it. All of the claims had already been completely dismantled in bits and pieces. But if you were looking at antiwar.com, you already knew the whole story before the war ever started. I could debunk all this stuff right off the top of my head by the time the tanks rolled in. So,
this is what
anybody.
Sorry, Scott.
No, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying when I remember there was at the pinnacle of the Iraq War, the second one, we were getting a lot of movement, a lot of anti-war movement. A lot of people were promoting antiwar.com and had the pink ladies go and demonstrate. And then Obama got in, and this is the problem I find with statism, is that Obama then got in and instantly all that disappeared. All those people rallying against war disappeared. And nothing really changed, just the head on this state.
Yep. Well, and the same thing had happened, which, we should say actually Code Pink didn't go away. I mean, their mass movement behind them did, but the ladies that actually run Code Pink, they've been hardcore all along.
Awesome.
We should give them credit. But yeah, no, I mean, by and large, that's absolutely right. It's all partisanship. And in the 1990s, we saw, the rage against the jackbooted thugs of the national military police state. And then it turned out, we just hate Bill Clinton. We love government. And once George W. Bush got in there, you couldn't find a group of people who love government more than the anti-government patriot movement of the 1990s, And then so same thing with the anti-war left. And that's why they switch off back and forth. They keep half the population dissatisfied, but not too angry. And the other side placated for a while, and then they switch.
Yeah, I've always seen it like these, when you have a monolith of a government, just a single government, the left can push against one side and it just topples the state. And what they slowly figured out is, hey, if you have a bit of a triangle, the left and the right, they push against each other. The people push on this side, the left holds them up, and then they swap over, and whatever side they push on it, the structure doesn't change.
Right. And always twirling towards state power, right? Not toward freedom, but toward an ever increasing amount. So whatever's good about conservatism is abandoned when the right is in power, and all of the worst and statist aspects are what's emphasized. And then the same thing on the left as well. All they're caring, as you said, about human rights and war, and the rest of it goes out the window when it's their hero doing it. So
let's first of all, there's apparently a fire outside. Second of all, it's the loudest thing. I want to maybe back it up a little bit because I feel like we're talking a little bit in piecemeal. And when we were talking about the Middle East at the conference, of course, you were talking a lot about Afghanistan because that's what the book is about. But for people who are not really familiar with what's going on in that region and why things are happening, can you take it back a little bit and basically tell us what's wrong with the Middle East, in 15 minutes or less, or, take your time. But I mean, I think that so many people lose sight that these are actually real countries with real people having actual different issues. It's not just a blob of the Middle East is a big mess. And also, to me, what was interesting that I never really got a chance to explore more was the fact that I guess before the 1900s, the Middle East was just like a bunch of like war kind of warlords and tribes and stuff. So it wasn't until the US and the UK, and correct me if I'm wrong, came in, started drawing up lines that things got a little bit crazy. And you talked a little bit about the history of the Saudi family in that way. So not to put you on the spot, but can you help give people a little bit more of a bird's eye view of what the situation is and then where, of course, we should put our efforts and how we can help. But we'll leave that for the end because that'll make us happy. Little tiny glimmers of what we can do to help.
All right. Well, so I don't know if I had to go down a list. I mean, obviously, Iran was a state and Egypt was a state. And now between them really was the Ottoman Empire up until the end of World War I. And so, exactly where the extent of their borders were at that point, I'm not the very best on that, but they ruled the Arabian Peninsula, at least de facto. No one else did. And they ruled Mesopotamia, what we now call Iraq and Syria and Lebanon. And then at the end of the First World War, the British Empire expanded by 1 million square miles. And basically the French got Lebanon and Syria, and the Brits got the rest. And they held on to except for, I guess, Turkey maintained their own independence. But the Brits got all of, their Arab possessions. And then, so at the end.
Wait, why did everybody go for this? Why did they just let the Brits do it? Or did they try and fight them and they just couldn't win? Why was that okay?
Yeah, it was a matter of being outgunned. I mean, they were dominated by superior Western forces, full stop. And then, of course, the Brits were pretty good at propping up these and those to be kings. It didn't work out in the case of Iraq very well, but it has worked out very well for them in Jordan this entire time. And then in Saudi Arabia, too. They were the ones who really made the original deal with the Al Saud family, that then the Americans inherited that and created Saudi Arabia. And I guess that wasn't really until the end of World War II. And so basically the deal is at the end of World War II, America inherited all the world's empires, less the Soviet Union and China and their limited spheres of influence. Of course, the Soviets did dominate Eastern Europe, but the rest of the world had fallen into the hands of the Americans and their allies / satellites. And so that's all of Japan's empire in the east, as well as all the British and Dutch and French and German empires in Africa and wherever. Now, there was decolonization, and American empire is sort of a different kind of, it's not even neo-imperialism, it's some other kind of unique American imperialism, which is mostly sock puppet dictators, very few troops and trainers and spies, but mostly bribery and blackmail and coup d'etats. And, you know, in the Cold War, obviously proxy wars in places like Korea and Vietnam and in Indonesia and other places like that. But most of the time just relying on the local satraps to enforce their own, you know, to enforce American profit motives and imperial motives, but not so much, you know, to the extent of colonization, moving Americans there for long-term ownership, like the British in Jamaica or something like that, right? It's more of an empire basis, as Chalmers Johnson called it.
You mentioned Korea there, and this is one that, you know, it's a bit more of a hot topic at the moment. And most people don't realize, you know, people talk about Korea being this crazy place with this weird dictator and all the people are weird. But most people don't realize that, you know, I don't know the exact stats, but during the war there, North Korea lost like 60% of the population or something like that. Like a huge number of people died.
2 million at least.
Yeah. It was
to the ground when they napalm. The entire country just burned it to the ground.
You know, and you got to wonder that, you know, if someone's so strange, if a whole society is so strange, you got to wonder why. It's not just because they're weird. Something's happened. And, you know, this is where history is so important to have a look. And this is why the internet is also such an amazing invention, because we can actually look at multiple points of view and not just one mainstream view. But I'd love to hear your...
Wait, I want to hear the rest of the story of the Middle East. Like, what happened here? I thought we were still talking about that. And then we started talking about North Korea. Hold on. We only covered like a couple countries. Can we back
There's
it
a
up?
whole world here of anti-warring.
What? Like, yeah, there's bad wars in other places. We can't solve them all. Let's focus on that one region because it's a real mess.
Well, I'll just try to say this really fast without demonstrating it. We can go back over points that you want to focus on. But basically, the bottom line is at the end of the Cold War, America supported the Mujahideen through CIA action in Afghanistan at the same time that they subsidized and supported Saddam Hussein against Iran. Then at the end of the Iran-Iraq war, Saddam was flat broke. The Gulf states were calling in his loans. He couldn't pay them back. They continued to add insult to injury. Long story short, he invades Kuwait with the permission of the U.S., but he goes too far, takes the whole country. So now he's in trouble. So then America moves all our military bases to Saudi Arabia in order to wage Iraq War I. And then at the end of Iraq War I, Bush Sr. encouraged the Shia and the Kurds to rise up over against Saddam Hussein. But then he realized, oops, that would actually be reversing the entire Reaganite policy of supporting Saddam to contain the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which is the reason they supported Saddam in the first place. I could have started with that. Anyway, so they attacked Iraq, but then at the end, when they betrayed the Shia uprising and changed their mind and let Saddam slaughter them, that became the excuse to stay in Saudi Arabia throughout the 1990s in order to enforce the blockade and the no-fly zones over the Shiite and Kurdish predominant parts of Iraq. And then that, and Israel is a huge part of it too. American support for Israel in their persecution of the Palestinians and of the Lebanese at that time was a huge part of the motivation, as well as just general American support for the dictatorships of the Middle East, the King Fahd regime in Saudi Arabia and Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, first and foremost there. And so this was the cause of the Al-Qaeda war against the United States in the 1990s. It was to replicate just what they had done to the Soviets, which was bait them into invading Afghanistan so you could bleed them to bankruptcy and force them all the way out. And then so you'll always hear the right-wingers say, if you read Jonah Goldberg in his article in National Review, Baghdad delenda est, Baghdad must be destroyed, he says, and they all say this over and over again, that, well, see, they learned that Ronald Reagan turned tail and ran after the Beirut bombing of 1983. And Bill Clinton turned tail and ran after a minor defeat of some Army Rangers and Delta guys in Mogadishu in 1993. And so they learned the lesson that if only they just commit some acts of terrorism against us, we're a paper tiger and we'll run home. But that's not really true. In fact, what they were trying to do was bait the United States empire into overreaction, into doing something stupid, like try to invade and occupy Afghanistan, which is the size of Texas, has mountains like Colorado and deserts like California, and is landlocked in the middle of Central Asia, and where our allies to Afghanistan's east, the Pakistanis, have a major motive in stabbing us in the back and supporting our enemies in Afghanistan, because we're supporting their enemies in taking over the government in the capital city in Kabul. And so the whole thing is this horrible perpetual motion machine that's been going now for 16, 17 years. We're fighting for a group of minorities against the plurality population of the country, the Pashtuns, who absolutely will not accept what amounts to foreign domination by Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Hazaras in the north. And so we're doing exactly what Al-Qaeda wanted us to do. Then, as I was explaining in the talk on the cruise there, which everybody sign up for the Contra cruise next year. That was so much fun.
So fun.
So what happened was George Bush went and did what Michael Scheuer, the former CIA anti-Al-Qaeda analyst, called the hoped for but unexpected gift to bin Laden. He went and got rid of the socialist, secular infidel Saddam Hussein, which is exactly what Osama bin Laden called him, his enemy. And he went and got rid of Saddam Hussein, and he moved the front of the jihadi war 1,500 miles to the west, right? Then after Bush, and in doing so, he gave the entire west of Iraq, turned it into Jihadistan, basically, the land of the Sunni-based insurgency, the victims of now the American war to finish that uprising that Bush Sr. had encouraged and betrayed. Well, George Bush Jr. came in and sided with them and helped them take the capital city in an 8-year civil war to kick the Sunnis out of power there, and in a big sectarian cleansing campaign. So Al-Qaeda took basically the west of Iraq, created a whole new group that had never existed before, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They had been 400 men. Now they were 4,000. Then America basically helped the Shiite supermajority win that war, and they said, all right, thanks, now get the hell out of the country. And the Al-Qaeda fighters had actually been marginalized by the tribal authorities in Iraqi Sunnistan, who were sick and tired of their nonsense, and who had stabbed them in the back and shot them and marginalized them before David Petraeus ever even came and took credit for the so-called awakening, which is all that was. And so the jihadi threat in Iraq actually had died down for a little while, but then here comes Barack Obama. And just like if he was the crazy, ridiculous, secret Muslim terrorist agent that all the right-wingers thought he was, he took the side of the jihadists in Libya and in Syria in their wars against Gaddafi, successful against Gaddafi in 2011, and then their half-ass war that they've been fighting in Syria since 2011, which ended up leading to the creation of an actual bin Ladenite Islamic State, which was the wildest dream of these kooks, which could have never come true in a million years if it wasn't for George Bush and then Barack Obama handing it to him on a silver platter. And they created this actual Islamic State from 2014 through just now. It's only finally been crushed in Mosul and Raqqa now 3 years later in 2017. And in the process of this, Bush and then Obama have turned 400 men into about 40,000 men of these bin Ladenite kook terrorists. And then all along, we are subjected, and this was the real point that you were getting at in the first place, Tatiana, is we are subjected to the idea that these damn Muslims attack us because they're Muslims, and Islam makes them attack people who aren't Islamic, and for some reason makes them obsessed with the middle part of North America or something like this. But that's just not it. The reason that Muslims are at war with us is because we are at war with Muslims. Our government is the world empire. Our government has been bombing and attacking Muslim countries, overthrowing their regimes, torturing their people to death, occupying their cities, supporting first the Shiite death squads and then the Sunni death squads and then the Shiite death squads again, over and over throughout, spreading sectarian war throughout the region. And then we're supposed to... that all this is because Ronald Reagan and George Bush and Bill Clinton and George Bush and Barack Obama never did nothing to nobody. And that all of us were ignorant this whole time during all those, Army of One commercials, that any of this fighting was even happening. When in fact, we know that that's not true. I mean, most of what I just told you, you already know anyway, right? I'm just telling you a narrative. I'm taking you through 30 years in a row, but you know there was an Iran-Iraq war. You know we supported Saddam Hussein during that time. You know that George Bush encouraged and then betrayed the revolution after the first Iraq war, etc. like this. I'm just explaining that this is how we got into this mess. And then they want to say that, oh, look, just like, and I'm not saying that the other side then are justified. They attack civilians. That's it. They're murderers, in pure violation of the non-aggression principle in every way. If they had attacked the Pentagon without using a civilian airliner to do it, at least that would have been a legitimate military target as far as that goes. But we've seen how these Al-Qaeda guys are in practice in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, for that matter, in Egypt and other places where they've waged attacks, and they're butchers of civilians. And of course, across Europe and the United States as well. So just because America is the evil empire doesn't mean that they are the good guys. They're still bad guys too, leading the insurrection against American power. It's not an apologia for them. It's just explaining the true context of how we got into this mess. And then, of course, it raises the question that maybe we could just stop being a world empire and mind our own business here in North America, and we wouldn't have this problem. And so then, and this was Michael Bolden's question to me, is, yeah, but if you're saying invading over there was giving in to these guys and what they wanted, well, what about leaving? Because that's giving in and what they want in the end anyway, right? And so I say, yeah, that's true. But I'm not talking about negotiating with terrorists or giving in to their demands. I'm talking about stop doing the wrong thing that you're not supposed to be doing in the first place. And then, yeah, also that's the best way to take care of your terrorism problem. And, Hezbollah waged a suicide attack, a suicide, what the hell? They had this as a strategy against the Israeli occupation in southern Lebanon for years, for 10 years or something. They used suicide attacks. As soon as the Israelis withdrew from Lebanon in 2000, that was it. There hadn't been one more, not one more. It just ended.
So when you talk about the Middle East, that was really great, by the way. Thank you for that overview. But we didn't really touch on the role of Israel and in that region. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because usually, I'm interested in what's going on there, but I feel like it's this contentious topic where if you say anything against Israel, you're anti-Semitic, which is like totally ridiculous, but people can't have that conversation. And I'm sure that there's fault to be laid at both sides. Can you talk about how Israel's presence and like the whole Palestinian crisis, how that's influencing the region, and can you assign blame to one side or another? Like, is there anything that like how do people get out of that big mess over there?
All right, well, I'll start with my previous confusion on the issue. Actually, in all of my studying of foreign policy and all the reading and writing and everything I was doing, I put off learning about this till last because I was under the impression that they're basically fighting over God gave this land to me, no, God gave this land to me. So it's all supernatural and therefore irrational and intractable and, basically to my mind, stupid and kind of beneath my worry of trying to get into that mess. Another big part of my confusion was that, in essence, the Palestinians already had a state. Palestine was the country next door to Israel, and that they are constantly attempting to extort land away from Israel. And it was called Land for Peace. If you give us some land, we will stop flinging these horrible terrorist attackers against you, right? Which is the narrative, but of course is all muddy and unclear because the reality is at the same time, they're talking about maybe one day creating a Palestinian state. No, there's not a Palestinian state. Where a Palestinian state would be is the west bank of the Jordan River and including Jerusalem. And yet that land and the Gaza Strip on the Mediterranean Sea near the Egyptian border. And that land has been conquered and occupied by Israel since 1967. So that was what was left of Palestine after the creation of Israel in 1948. In 1967, after a war that the Palestinians didn't start, it was, really Israel started the war against Egypt, and then Syria and Jordan jumped in on Egypt's side, and Israel beat all three of them with American help But ever since then, they've taken control of the West Bank and they've colonized it, which America outlawed after World War II. Basically, Hitler ruined aggressive war for everybody. And now the world law is you are not allowed to change your borders with aggressive force, or the U.S. will attack you and make you stop it. That's basically, we're the world sheriff enforcing that world law. Except in the case of Israel, oh, well, screw you, Palestinians. The Israelis can come in and take the entire West Bank and slowly but surely take all of even East Jerusalem, what's left of Palestine-controlled Jerusalem. And they have no regard for the property rights of the people there. They're not under martial law. They're under foreign occupation law, which is no law at all. And what's called the Palestinian Authority sort of sounds like, well, maybe that's the government of Palestine, right? No, those are the trustees that rule inside this Israeli prison that we call the West Bank. They have, if you look at the population of the people who are under the control of the Israeli state, it's 50-50, Arabs and Jews. With the Arabs are divided, I think 20% Christians and 80% Muslims. But so it's an apartheid state. People say, oh no, it's going to be an apartheid state. It is an apartheid state because Israel has already de facto annexed the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They're never giving them back. And as Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister, has said repeatedly, from the river to the sea, all of this land belongs to us. And he repeatedly talks, I think it was Jonathan Cook was pointing out the other day in an article, they talk about the land of Israel as opposed to the state of Israel, because the state of Israel does not include the West Bank by any international law or any real legitimate definition. But the land of Israel means that, yeah, we're going to ultimately annex it one day. And the 5 million Palestinians that live on the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, well, just screw them. In fact, they announced a brand new plan. It was on the front page of Haaretz, which is the New York Times of Tel Aviv. I mean, it's the major liberal Israeli daily. And the front page is, yeah, the Jerusalem mayor has a brand new plan for kicking Arabs out of Jerusalem. And what they call Judaizing these people's property, kicking them out of their homes and literally moving right into their homes, just outright stealing them at gunpoint, and then bringing, military occupation forces with them wherever they go. And then they invoke zoning or whatever they want as some shady excuse to simply destroy people's property. They literally bulldozed an entire hundreds-year-old cemetery to build a giant museum of tolerance on top of it about the victimhood of the Israelis, as they're the ones victimizing and colonizing the Palestinians. And so there's just no way to overstate, and never remind the invasion of Lebanon in 1982, and they would sometimes pull out and then invade again, off and on, but mostly they occupied from 1982 through the year 2000, mercilessly killing people for no reason whatsoever. They invaded in the first place to roust out the PLO. Well, that worked, but then they stayed and started killing the Shiite Arabs who lived in the South. And it wasn't until 2 years into the occupation that Hezbollah was created in reaction to them as this Shiite militia for southern Lebanon, the party of God, to defend the people from the Israeli occupation. That had no legitimate reason to be there whatsoever. They'd already succeeded in their mission. And so they cause a lot of problems. They generate a lot of hostility against the United States, because even though Americans don't understand, there's no confusion in the Middle East that those are all American F-16s and M-16s that are pointed at their people. I mean, when you hear about there's a war with Gaza, there's no war. It's a canned hunt. They're just bombing a prison camp that couldn't possibly shoot back at them.
I really am having a hard time seeing the argument that's like, it just sounds like Israel sucks, basically. That was the conclusion. Like, they're really very destructive force and they're in bed with America. Is there anything to be said on the Israeli side, like, that would, like, because the people there are, from what I understand, I have some Israeli friends, they're quite, like, brainwashy over there. And, like, I wouldn't want people to think that because I live in America and we're a war empire that I'm also supportive of that. But there does seem to be some support with like that mindset of people there feeling, you know, that they're justified in their encroachment on Palestinian territory, whatever, however you want to phrase it. Like, how are we going to change their minds? And do you think that people there think that what their government is doing is good? And if so, how are we going to break up the bond? You know, because if America's the policeman, which is a joke in itself, well, they're not doing a very good job of policing Israel. So I don't, like, what's the conclusion? Are we all just screwed and we should just be happy that we don't live there? Or is there anything that can be like addressed that would help understand the situation in a way where it could be resolved more?
Okay.
Like
so
maybe hearing one other side. I don't know. It just seems.
My understanding of it, Tatiana, is that if the Israelis would just give up the West Bank and the Gaza Strip to be a Palestinian state and East Jerusalem and be happy with 1967 borders, that they'd be fine. You know, in 1948, when they created the state of Israel, they ethnically cleansed 750,000 people, right? That's like the population of Austin, Texas. And they kicked 750,000 people out. And they went to refugee camps in the West Bank and in Gaza, in Syria, in Libya, and all over, to exile in Jordan. Okay. And that was wrong. I don't think there's any way really to spin that was okay. I mean, it was basically the same principle that it's okay for whites to do this to Indians in Massachusetts, that, well, whatever, we're civilized, they're savages. We're at least sort of white European Jews, mostly Ashkenazi Jews coming, and they're brown. And it was the end of the colonial era, but not the very end, not yet. And so, but my point is they got away with it. I mean, what they created was an 80-20 super duper majority Jewish to Arab ratio, as they define it, because they don't define it Jewish to Christian or Jewish to Muslim. They define it Jewish to Arab ratio, 80-20. And so, hey, you know what? It's ugly as hell, but you won. And that was way back in 48 at the end of World War II, when everything was shaken out all over the place, right? Mao hadn't even won in China yet, right? So it is what it is. And I think that they could have got away with that and they'd be fine. And that if Israel, instead of having a policy of domination and fragmenting their allies when they're not supporting military police states like in Egypt over there, and they would just play fair and honest with the people of the region and the people of Palestine, that actually they'd be fine. They'd be surprised to find out how good everything would be. Everybody eats at each other's restaurants. They intermarry. They do business. As Stanley Cohen, the civil rights lawyer, is always saying, you let people live together, let them trade together, and things will be fine. Instead,
Totally.
Like a little America over there. It'd be like if we never, ever stopped beating up on the Navajo, right? Like they have their little reservation out there in Arizona, but nope, we just still keep bombing you anyway and pretending that you're the threat and you're coming to get us all the time. And it's just totally out of control. And when it comes to the population of Israel, my understanding is that actually most people there agree with me, and that it's the right-wing settler movement, who are very powerful politically, who have domination over the policy, and it's a very right-wing nationalist government in there. But that doesn't mean that that represents the will of the people of Israel, who more or less would, I think, by solid majorities from all I've ever learned about this, agree that they should give up the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem to be an independent Palestinian state. In fact, our friend Dave Smith, who we were hanging out with on the cruise, who proudly identifies as a Jew from Brooklyn, who says, you know, who's part of the Jewish community as he defines it, with however many different Jewish communities there are in New York City, who knows, but he's part of at least one of them. And he says to them, if you're against the right of return, that is the right of Palestinians to return to their homes in Israel, if you're against the right of return, that is a far more controversial stance to take than if you're against, or than if you're for it, right? I'm sorry. In other words, they like Stanley Cohen, the civil rights lawyer I just mentioned, U.S. Jews are liberals, and they really believe in civil rights principles, and that means Palestinians are humans, and Palestinians have rights. And it's not a question of whether it's this tribe or that tribe. It's a question of whether they're individuals or not. And you can't treat people unfairly. Is that their olive tree? What gives you the right to cut down this guy's olive tree? Because you're Jewish and he's Palestinian Arab? No. That's his property right. John Locke here, not Moses. That's how, you know what I mean? So, and this is what the first thing I said about the mystical fight. It's not a mystical fight. The question is whether Palestinians own property in the way that we understand all other humans own property, or whether the Israelis can invoke their mystical excuse to violate those property rights. The Palestinians aren't saying, no, God gave this land to us. They're saying, we live here. This is our land. That's not even in question. We homesteaded it, right? Ask Walter Block. Even he'll have to admit it belongs to them, right? The Israelis are the ones who are saying no, because we have this ancient Hebrew mythology that we pretend to believe in, which, by the way, like the majority of the population of Israel are atheists, right? They don't even believe in God, except that he gave all this land to them and they can therefore steal it from the people who live on it. But you don't hear mystical, religious arguments from the Palestinian side. It's only the excuse that the Israeli side has to resort to explain their behavior.
How much do you think people that belong in these states, the actual people that live in these countries, also in America, but all over the world, how much are they to answer for aggression that the state portrays? Because, you know, we see a lot of people that live in Israel, or a lot of people that live in Palestine, and when terrorism happens and another terrorist attack happens, then the state uses that to gain more power. And usually it happens because the people are sitting there fearful and saying, oh, do something. And how much are we responsible as people that live in these countries, but also what can we do to stop these sort of knee-jerk reactions as citizens?
Yeah, well, so to the first question, I have no idea. I mean, for me, like yourself, I take it for my responsibility to try to explain to people who don't understand what's important and what needs to be opposed and that kind of thing, right? As best as I can do. As far as assigning that level of responsibility onto other people, or to what degree we're somehow all responsible for the actions of our leaders. I mean, really, it's a paradox, right? It's just, I love the phrase, it could have been Ron Paul, because in reality, no, it could not have been Ron Paul. But then again, yeah, no, it could have been Ron Paul. If the American people had said, hey, wait a minute, like the 20 million people who did say, hey, wait a minute, if the other 120 million people had said, hey, wait a minute, all they would have had to do is join the Republican Party and vote in the primaries. And all they would have had to do is insist. All they would have had to do is give them a 60-40 vote total like they did for Donald Trump. Right?
Yeah.
And so on one hand, no, it could have never been Ron, because he's good on everything. And that's just intolerable to power. But then again, if that's what the American people had really wanted, you know, and they didn't. But so what happens, though, is the three of us got to go down with their sinking ship. So I try to just focus on, like, try to do our part to educate people. You know, there are new reports. It's really the same old Operation Northwood stuff from the Kennedy days. But there's, you know, newly highlighted CIA papers, I guess, that like went along in parallel with military papers advocating attacks on Cuban residents in Miami and blaming it on Castro as an excuse to attack Cuba. And I think, you know, you don't have to believe in every truth or plot you ever heard of to just say, you know what, like, I'm going to take that as an inoculation against the idea that whatever it is they tell me I better be afraid of, and right now, that actually, you know what, I think I'm going to go ahead and hold my horses. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and wait and see. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and see who's trying to exploit my emotional reaction and for what reason. And just instead say humph and just, you know what, why go along with this? Bad things happen all the time. You can't freak out about all of them. So,
no, but the reason I brought it up was, you know, I have a lot of Palestinian friends, Israeli friends who are literally fearful of some of these rockets that randomly hit, and Palestinians are also fearful on their side. And it's just this constant fear on both sides, and this escalation of state power to, you know, say, well, we're doing something about it. And it actually reminds me a lot of in Northern Ireland, when the IRA there was a lot of terrorist activities there, where there was constant push and constant terrorism, which only then made the state stronger and stronger and stronger. And then it comes out years later that, we had MI5 as one of the closest persons to Sinn Féin, which was the leader of the IRA. So we see that the state really loves some of these terrorist activities because it gives them a power to buy more hardware, to just grow.
Yep. Well, I mean, as far as the rockets coming out of Gaza, I mean, those are about as harmless as a rocket could get and still be called a rocket and not a Roman candle as far as that goes. And Hamas, which began as a terrorist group, this time not just in reaction to Israeli aggression like Hezbollah, but actually the Israeli Mossad helped to create Hamas in the first place to be a right-wing religious alternative to the PLO. But anyway, Hamas that rules the Gaza Strip now, whenever anybody fires off a rocket, they send their cops to go and grab these guys and arrest them. And that hasn't been them in years and years. They've abided by the ceasefire. And then whenever the Israelis attack on some pretext, as we've seen in 2008, 12, and 14, that then you see some limited number of rockets. But I think you had one civilian killed in the 2014 so-called war, where these guys are firing rockets. This is basically equivalent to a prison riot, and saying that, prisoners at Attica who fire Roman candles over the wall, that they're really, the aggressors and the rest of the society are on their back heel. But that's just really not right. They're the ones who are pinned in a cage, whether their complaints are all legitimate or not. I mean, Hamas is really, a pseudo government at best. I mean, they operate what's really an open air prison camp. And under those terms. And then, but whenever you see bin Ladenites pop up in the Gaza Strip, Hamas just kills them. Hamas doesn't even put them on trial. Hamas just says, "Oh, you're trying to bring that Zawahiri stuff around here," bang, and just kill them outright. And that's happened 4 or 5 times. So, Benjamin Netanyahu goes, "Oh, Hamas is Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda is ISIS, and ISIS is He's a damn liar." And then he tries to lump them in with their enemies, the Iranians. And it's just nonsense, absolute nonsense, and that's not, I don't think I have anything good to say about Hamas other than they're just not Al-Qaeda, that's what they're not. But it goes to reveal the agenda of Benjamin Netanyahu, that, as he put it before, they'll never allow there to be a Palestinian state. They'll never allow freedom for these people. And
so what can we do?
Now, what degree are those people responsible for the PLA or responsible for Hamas? Not at all. I mean, you could, again, in my perspective, Hamas and the PLA in Gaza and in the West Bank, they're just the trustees inside Israeli prisons. But these are Israeli governments, control them, pay them, collect all their taxes and distribute their taxes, pay all their cops' salaries, all their everything. So
Tatiana promised that there would be some good news at the end.
No, there is no good news. I have a couple quick questions because we're way over time for the show, but I did want to get to a few things. A question one of our listeners gave me was, what are the demands of the Palestinians that Israel could meet to achieve peace? But at this point, I'm thinking like they're not really interested in making any kind of concessions. It sounds like they're like, nope, F you, nothing. Like, is there any kind of effort on the Israeli side that is saying like, we are trying to operate in good faith, like we'll give you guys X, or they're just straight up like, nope, sorry, you guys are worthless?
Nope. And you know what? There's I'm sorry, I can't remember the young woman's name, but there was a thing in, I guess it was New York Magazine or the New York Review of Books, by this young lady who really did this huge investigative story, long-term take on John Kerry's effort to push for real negotiations for a 2-state solution in the Obama years. And on the Israeli side, it's just pure obstruction. I mean, whoa, what are you doing with that map? You can't bring a map in here. We haven't agreed to have maps yet. Like, we would have to have a whole new meeting to agree to have a whole new meeting to see whether we're going to agree to actually bring a map into the room to look at the map, and this is their game all along, is what they call establishing facts on the ground. We can just string you along. They signed the Oslo peace accords saying they'd give up the West Bank. Hell, they signed the Camp David Accords saying they'd let there be a Palestinian state in 1979 with Jimmy Carter. Then that was when they made peace with Egypt and Jordan. And they said they would give up the West Bank and the Gaza Strip to be a Palestinian state. They never followed through on that. Then came the Oslo Accords under Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton. And they never followed through on any of that.
No one holding them accountable for this, though. Like, you can't, I mean, I guess the answer is that the U.S. and Israel are in bed together, and the U.S., if they're the bully, then they're not beating up their friend because their friend backs them up, right? I mean.
That's it. And look, the entire rest of the world, every political government on the planet is on the other side of this issue, including all of our EU allies and Canada and Mexico and everybody. And it's not because, oh, they're all just so anti-Semitic. You know what I mean? It couldn't possibly be that the entire opinion of mankind, as the Declaration of Independence puts it, is based on pure malevolence against innocence. It's just, you know what? We're supposed to believe that about the Muslims, but now we're supposed to believe that about all of the rest of Eurasia and Africa and Latin America and all of the rest of human civilization, that they're all motivated by anti-Semitism rather than the fact that the Palestinians are simply being treated unfairly. People say, why single out Israel? There's no other country on earth that is being dominated and colonized like is what is happening to the Palestinians right now.
This is beyond disturbing, and it's appalling that really people can't talk about it. And otherwise, like that conversation anything should be open for conversation. That conversation just feels very stifled, unfortunately. What do you think of the era of Trump, and what does that mean for the anti-war movement? I think people voted for Trump despite the, maligning of Trump and what a pain he is. But, people thought that he was going to be the anti-war guy. A lot of people, I thought he was going to be more anti-war than Hillary. What do you think has been the result, and like, what's the future of the world with Trump in charge and at the button?
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as the Hillary thing, I think you still may be right about that. I mean, honestly, I think up until the point he gets me nuked, I'm going to still be arguing that, Hillary would have been worse. I mean, if Hillary was in charge, Al-Qaeda would rule in Damascus right now. I mean, we'd have carpet bombed the Ba'athist government right out of power in Syria already. Now, that may still happen. I mean, Rex Tillerson was just threatening the Assad regime the other day. So it's not like things couldn't get worse. But Hillary Clinton is hell-bent for destruction on that. And, it already called Putin Hitler and all of this stuff is absolutely the worst on the anti-Russian Cold War. Now, Trump could still be provoked into picking a fight with Russia that he can't back down from, that it could get us all killed. I mean, it is that dangerous. I don't want to sound too alarmist because I don't really think that's going to happen, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. But I think if Hillary was in there, we'd just absolutely be on a straight collision course for conflict with Russia in 4 or 5 different places, in Syria, in Ukraine, in the Baltics. And, for that matter, our navies in the Black Sea, in Georgia, wherever she can think to make matters worse. She'd have sent offensive weapons, tanks and God knows what to the junta in Ukraine. And so good riddance to her. But now, as far as Trump, I mean, we have a real problem with the left is embarrassed to attack him. As Dave Smith put this well, they don't want to have to admit that, I'm attacking him for the same thing Obama did. And I say Obama's the greatest president ever. And so how do they climb down from that? It's going to be difficult. We're now at like a year and counting. The liberals are bad, but you know what? I think the divisions between the liberals and the leftists have never been sharper. And the leftists and the communists absolutely hate the liberals and absolutely hate war. And I think they have. I don't think they respected Obama. I mean, the actual leftists, not progressives, but to the left of them. The liberals and the progressives, they're pretty caught up in Democratic Party nonsense. But overall, I think their heart's in the right place when it comes to these things. I don't know if we can get them to really fight about it with us like we'd want. But ultimately, what's really important is that we convince the right. And as you said, Trump he really took both sides of every issue, right? But he did say a lot of stuff about we never should have had a war on terrorism at all. We should have never been over there at all. We should have paid these politicians just to go to the beach, he said, which is a Lew Rockwell line, right? That's pretty good. And I like pointing out that he attacked the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, and Jeb and George Bush Jr. for it in South Carolina, the most militarized state in the Union, in a debate there. The next day was the South Carolina primary. And he got 60% of the vote. And the other 17 candidates shared 40. He stomped them into the ground. And what had happened, I think, was that their emotional attachment to defending Bush and defending torture and defending the war and opposing all those stupid liberals who think they know better from that, John Kerry era of 2004, that Howard Dean era, all that feeling had worn away. Instead, now they just miss their brother. And now they're looking at Fallujah and saying, man, what the hell were we doing over there again? When look at the way things are there now. And they were ready to hear. They don't want to hear Susan Sarandon or some whiny liberal Hollywood kook say it. They want to hear a tough guy, alpha male, at least pretend one, like Donald Trump, grunt and say, okay, that's enough. We can call this off now. We can back down from this now. We've done our part. We kicked our ass. And so now it's time to go. And that's what I think they were really hoping for. And that's what they really responded to. And I think that really reveals our opening here is to attack the right from the right and to get as many veterans as we can to speak out, and especially conservative and libertarian ones. So they don't sound like, oh, this is bad for democracy or whatever, the way a liberal talks. But they talk like a right winger, and they say enough is enough of this, especially combat veterans come out and do like David Hackworth and just say, I'm tougher than all of you and I know better. It's time to call this off now. And that's the way really to approach this conflict. And that's, I think, honestly, as much as Trump has any sort of thought system or any kind of set of ideas at all of any kind in his head, I think he likes to hear that stuff. I think that if we could make that be the narrative in the culture, I think that he would come to reflect that pretty easily. Now, what we're up against, of course, is the entire power structure of American banking, the bureaucracies, the military, the spies, and all of the arms manufacturers and all the lobbyist power they can bring to bear. But then again, still, we're society and they're just the interests. So if the people have their act together on this, and especially push from the right angles on this, I think we can make a lot of progress. And now's the time. I mean, we're stuck with this situation with this guy for at least 3 more years. And I'm thinking more like, 7. So.
Wow. All of this really super interesting. But we want to wrap. But I want to give you a chance to talk about the book for sure, because I would really love it if everybody would support Scott going out and pick up this book. And then tell us a little bit about the Libertarian Institute. Those are 2 of your kind of things I'd like to help highlight.
Cool. Thank you. Well, so the book, I worked really hard on it and everybody likes it. So read it, because supposedly it was pretty good, according to people who I like.
Fool's errand, folks.
Yeah. So Ron Paul likes it, and Daniel Ellsberg and Patrick Coburn and Anand Gopal and all of my best Afghan war experts. There's a lot of Michael Hastings in here, the late, great Michael Hastings, who I used to interview a lot during the Obama surge. And, I make the case, as I talked about here, how we got into it, how we got into this mess with the terror war overall, and then really a focus on what all has gone wrong in Afghanistan and why to call it off now. So that's the book. It's Fool's Errand. The audio book will be out like in a couple of weeks. If I say 2, then it's probably 3 or 4, but I'm almost done editing it. I got to go back over it one more time. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, that sounds really neat. Who's doing the audiobook? Is it Stephanie Murphy?
No, it's me.
Oh, okay, fine. That's as good.
I don't have to share the money. I split it with myself.
No, I like it when the author reads the book. I only mentioned Stephanie because she does a lot of different cool Liberty stuff and Bitcoin stuff. And what's the scoop with the Libertarian Institute? Because you recently founded that.
Well, yeah, honestly, it started out because I wanted to give Will Grigg a job, and I always thought we should work together. But how the hell are we going to make any money? We'll probably make less money than we both already make. And then I realized, I knew this guy named Mike who had sort of been looking for something to do along these lines, and I just hadn't put 2 and 2 together quite yet. And then it finally clicked that I'll get this guy Mike to help run the thing, and I'll bring on Will Grigg, and then of course Sheldon Richman is my good friend, and at that time had left the Future Freedom Foundation and needed a political home. So I said, yeah, and then it'll be the 3 of us. And Sheldon is known as a left libertarian, but that doesn't mean he's a left-wing deviationist from libertarianism. It means that he's a pure libertarian. Just in his conception, libertarianism fits on the left. There's nobody better on guns and taxes than Sheldon Richman, trust me. So anyways, I got Sheldon Richman, and then I got Will Grigg, who is a former John Bircher, who turned into the greatest hero of the everyman who gets his house raided or who gets, sent off to the penitentiary on some bogus charges and some fake trials, and did incredibly heroic work for a solid decade after leaving the John Birch Society on, helping out the little guy, passing repeatedly the Tom Joad test, as he put it. And but then he died in April, which is really unfortunate. And it's kind of a problem too that I created the Institute right in the middle of writing a book. I was about halfway through the book at the time, so I haven't put as much effort into it as I'd like to, but I'm trying to get a brand new start with it right now. We've got a book of Will Griggs that's coming out, and the Institute published Fool's Errand in the first place, and then we're going to put out a book of Will Griggs, and we have another couple of books of Sheldon Richman's coming as well. So that's going to be our real priority for now, is publishing. And we got a great little stable of writers and bloggers there. So we have great stuff on our website every day at Libertarian Institute. And we're taking submissions too, editor at libertarianinstitute.org, if anybody wants to try out writing for us. And I'm trying to broaden, not just foreign policy stuff. We're doing all libertarian topics and interesting things at Libertarian Institute that we can, and trying to work with other libertarians. For example, this week, we're really trying to help promote and get other libertarians to promote this effort to support this House resolution. It's called HCON Res 81. That's House Concurrent Resolution 81. And what it is it's invoking the War Powers Act to stop the attack against the regime in Sana'a, Yemen, which is under no conceivable theory covered by the authorization to use military force after 9/11 that was passed to authorize war against Al-Qaeda, and now they're interpreting it to mean ISIS and Al-Shabaab and whoever they want. But in this case, this part of the war is for Al-Qaeda and ISIS against their enemies, the Houthis and the former Saleh government there. And so it is in no sense, it couldn't possibly be covered by the AUMF. And so Walter Jones and some other libertarian Republicans are trying to invoke the War Powers Resolution in order to stop it. It's a huge thing, and the vote is going to be this week. And here's the deal, too. Anybody who calls their congressman and then emails me, scott@scotthorton.org, I will set you up with a lifetime subscription to Listen and Think audiobooks, libertarian audiobooks. They've already got like 20 titles out. Mine is coming out through their Fool's Errand. You'll get that for free, too. And for the rest of your life, free libertarian audiobooks. All you got to do is email me and promise me that, yeah, you really did just call your congressman or write them an email insisting that they support this resolution this week. So that's
what we're saying. Support this resolution this week, because sometimes it's a little bit unclear if you're supposed to say thumbs up or thumbs down. I'm certainly going to do that. And I think that's a really cool offer. Cool. Very good.
Yeah.
Lifetime subscription. Usually you'd have to donate $200 to the Scott Horton Show or the Libertarian Institute to get that deal. But,
or you could just make one phone call and harass your congressman, which is your civic duty, even if you don't believe in government in the first place. I think we got to at least call these sites and things in.
This is like voting no on a bond issue, right? You're not committing. You're not saying, and if it passes, then it's okay to rob me now, right? You're just doing your best to defend yourself. That's it. Lysander Spooner covers this in No Treason. It's all in there. Check. Okay, you can support a resolution to invoke the authority of Congress to prevent the president from killing people. Okay, there's no positive authorization for action in here, only negative. There's no libertarian compromise here. It's if you could be an absolute dropout, tune in, drop out, anarchist, agorist, voluntarist, whatever that doesn't do political action. And this isn't that. This is just trying to stop a genocide. That's all. You know. Simple as that. And can be done. Can be done.
Well, I'll definitely be calling. Josh, you should just call and pretend you're American.
Yeah, hi.
There you go. Perfect.
American accent. Yeah.
Well, yeah, this has been
in your zip code. Look, it's HCON Res 81.
We'll definitely get this out on the airwaves. Like we've got the live version, but then I populate it throughout social media. I'll put the pedal to the metal on that one to get it out sooner so we can share that with everybody. At least it's a one little tiny small action item. We have to wrap the show, but thank you so much, Scott, for sharing your knowledge with us. I would love to have you back another time if you're up for it. I would love to hear about North Korea. Although maybe I'll call it Michael Malice because he did a really neat thing on Joe Rogan about that. And maybe I'll save you for Latin America, which we didn't even get into all that nonsense. Latin
America, honestly.
What?
That. I mean, in principle, I'm great on it, but in terms of deep knowledge, I don't have it.
Well, probably no more than me. All right, folks. So please support Scott. You can pick up Fool's Errand online, or you can just call your congressman about HConRes 81 this week. And then if you can email Scott afterward, he'll send you like 1 million books. Okay, maybe 20 for free for life. And yeah, so make sure that you go to foolserrand.us. You can also go to libertarianinstitute.org, scotthorton.org, and of course, support our friends at antiwar.com. A quick thank you to Agnieszka once again for sharing her story and kind of bringing things full circle. Any final words to our audience? Anybody want to say goodbye? Anything else, or is that it?
Just follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show.
Awesome. All right, cool. So rock and roll, everybody. Let's spread the peace. And if you've got any extra Bitcoins, the price is up. Feel free to donate to Scott's organizations or support your favorite artists like me and Agnieszka, and spread the word about our work too. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thanks again. Peace out.
Thank you.